Hi, I think we're going to get started. Thank you all for coming to learn a little bit more about the MBTA Communities Law, in addition to what you've heard on the news lately, I'm sure, and then how it will impact West Bridgewater. I'm Tracy Aldrich, I'm your town planner. With me tonight is Jeff Davis. He is a senior planner with the Horsley Witten Group, who is helping us with technical assistance in the process of getting into compliance with the law. Also up here this evening, David Gagney, the town administrator, and Hugh Hurley, the planning board chair. There is right now some information available after this evening if you want to go and take a look on the town planners page of the website. And tomorrow, the presentation from this evening will be posted there as well, so you can have that for reference. Just some general housekeeping. I know that there's probably a lot of questions. I think a lot of the information that you're going to hear in the presentation will answer a lot of those questions, but we're going to open it up for Q&A at the end. We just ask that you kind of keep your questions to that point. And just so everyone knows, this is an informational session only. There's no vote being taken this evening. This is just to give you an opportunity to hear a little bit about the law and to ask questions. So with that, I will hand it over to Jeff Davis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I know everyone has a million competing interests on any given weeknight, and we really appreciate you coming out here and being engaged with your community. So, as Tracy said, I'm with the Horsley Witten Group. We're based out of Sandwich, Massachusetts, although I'm in our Providence, Rhode Island office. I am a planning nerd, a zoning nerd, a technician. So I work with communities throughout New England on zoning issues and reform. So we are providing free technical assistance to the town, which they requested through the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. And so I just wanted to start with that caveat. I do not work for the state. I am not representing the state, nor am I apologizing for the law itself. I am here, my role is to help communities figure out, if you choose to pursue compliance with the law, what are ways that you can do it that would make the most sense in the context of West Bridgewater and serve the community here. So that is my role. So just a quick show of hands. How many of you feel like you're fairly well averse to fairly well up to date on what the MBTA Communities Law is all about? How much of it? Just quick show of hands. Like I'm pretty familiar with the law. All right, just a handful. So I'm gonna try to fill you in tonight, and I apologize. Talking about zoning is really boring and really dry, and I'm going to try my best to present this in as interesting a fashion as possible. So, Section 3A of Massachusetts General Law, 40A, Chapter 40A, otherwise known as the MBTA Communities Act. In that act, communities that either have an MBTA MBTA station in their community or are adjacent to a town or city that has a station are required to adopt at least one zoning district in their town where multifamily housing is permitted by right. And by right can include site plan review. We'll get into that in more detail in a bit. And the basics of the law beyond that, that the minimum density has to be at least 15 units per acre. For communities that do have a transit station in their borders, a certain percentage of that unit capacity has to be within a half-mile or walking distance of that transit station. Of course, that's not applicable here in West Bridgewater because you don't have a transit station here. There can't be any age restrictions, and the housing or the zoning has to allow for housing that's suitable for families and children. In other words, you can't say this can only be for a 55-plus community, or you can't have any units that are more than 1 or 2 bedrooms. And finally, there has to be parity with other uses. So if you're allowing multifamily housing in this zone, you can't say 50% of the energy of multifamily housing has to be generated by renewable energy when the business next door doesn't have to comply to that. So it just has to have the same requirements you would have for any other use. All right, next question. How many of you have been following the Supreme Judicial Court and the ruling that they made on this law last week? All right, again, just a handful of hands. I will fill you in. So as you may know, some of the communities that either have a T station or a commuter rail station, their deadline for compliance has already passed, and among them was the town of Milton. And there was a court case, the Attorney General versus Town of Milton, where the town was arguing that the law was not constitutional and that the Attorney General had no authority to enforce the law. So on January 8th, last week, the Supreme Judicial Court ruled that, one, the act is constitutional, and that its basic tenet of communities having to have this one district that allows multifamily housing by right at a certain density was constitutional. Second, I said the Attorney General can use injunctive relief, can enforce the law, in essence, on top of tying certain state funding to compliance with the law. Now, at this point, we don't know what that means. We know that the Attorney General can enforce the law. We don't know in what way. So that is to be determined how the Attorney General's office may go about this. Next, one thing that the courts did say was the guidelines that were issued by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And so 2 years ago, that office had released guidelines for communities to say, all right, how can you go about complying with the law? So the court did void those guidelines because they had failed to follow the Administrative Procedures Act to develop regulations formally. So where we are today, literally as of 2 days ago, January 14th, the Office of Housing and Livable Communities submitted emergency regulations, which are currently in effect, and they are now starting the formal process for adopting regulations. So all communities, including West Bridgewater, now have an opportunity to comment on those again and influence any changes that may be made to the regulations. For the time being, nothing has changed for West Bridgewater. All of your requirements are the same. Your deadlines are the same. The deadlines have been extended for some of the communities for which the deadline is already passed. But here, basically so far, everything is the same. So when we say everything is the same, what are we talking about? What exactly does the law say West Bridgewater should do? So West Bridgewater is considered an adjacent small town. So that has the lowest threshold of any of the types of communities. Again, if you have a T station in your community, you have much higher expectations than a community like Bridgewater that has a small population and that does not have a transit station within your borders. So compliance for adjacent small towns is this December 31st. So we've got still not quite a year to go before compliance deadline. And your requirement is to hit 145 unit capacity, and I'm going to explain what that means. It does not mean that you have to build 145 apartments within the next couple of years. I will a further slide explain that in greater detail. Where did this number come from? It's 5% of your 2020 census housing units. So all adjacent small towns were to hit that 5% of their existing housing units. Your minimum gross density, 15 units per acre. That's true for all the communities. But unlike other communities, you do not have a minimum land area. This district could be as small or as large as you want, and you also have no location requirement. It can go anywhere in town that you want. So the adjacent small towns have a lot of flexibility. So I want to talk a little bit about what these targets don't mean, because I think there's been some confusion around that point. So as I already stated, this does not mean that the state is going to require housing to be built. All that's required is that the zoning is updated and that you've got, as my last line on the slide says, zoning is a menu, not a development plan. So we're just adding this option to the menu that you already have in your existing zoning. Second, this law does not compel communities to design or pay for new infrastructure to accommodate this development. So if you have infrastructure capacity limitations today that would not allow you, if a developer came in and said, I want to build 145 units, and you say, we do not have the infrastructure to support that, that's fine. And you can deny a permit, or you can have it way scaled back in order to mesh with the infrastructure capacity that you have today. And third, it does not supersede Massachusetts state environmental laws. So your Wetlands Protection Act, Title V, which has to do with septic systems. So again, if you do not have the water and sewer capacity to support a development, the law says that is fine. You can size that based on what your capacity is today and the environmental carrying capacity of the site. So even though the law says you need to allow up to this amount, in reality, based on all these other things, something that would actually get built today would likely be significantly less dense and have fewer units. I want to talk a little bit about affordable housing. So the law is not really about affordable housing, and that's been a sticking point for a lot of communities. So there is a limit on the amount of affordable housing that can be required within the MBTA communities district. So the law says no more than 10% of the units can be affordable, and at not less than 80% of the area median income. And again, how many people are familiar with the concept of AMI, or area median income? Okay, fill you in quickly. So the census calculates the average income for regions throughout the country, and that average income is 100% of the area median income. So the state is saying we're going to target that to people who are making just under that 80% of what's average for this region. Of course, if you go less than that, 60%, 40%, represent people with much lower incomes, and that becomes more expensive to subsidize. There are some ways to get around that 10% cap. You can increase up to 20% if you have what's called a 40R district. And again, I am so sorry, we're getting in the weeds on zoning law in Massachusetts, but a 40R district essentially is something a community can voluntarily choose to adopt that would allow mixed use, denser residential development, and in exchange, the state provides cash payments to the town. So you can go higher if you have one of those, or you can conduct an economic feasibility analysis to show that the housing demand here could support a greater level of affordability. And now on the positive end of things, what do these targets mean? Not what they don't mean, but what they do mean. So when we talk about unit capacity, that 145 unit capacity, what does that actually mean? So take a site, and we just close our eyes, pretend that anything on that site is gone, that you're starting from scratch. It's just a mental exercise, right? Not going to happen in reality, but close your eyes, pretend it's a vacant lot. Would zoning allow up to 145 units within that area? That is all you have to do. So the state has developed a compliance model, basically just an Excel spreadsheet that allows communities to enter in the details of your zoning, and it will pop out. You know, if you were starting from scratch, could you build this many units? So that is all you need to do to comply, is have the zoning that theoretically would allow that. So one of the exciting things in West Bridgewater, this is the 10th community I've worked in throughout the Commonwealth, and in most communities, the bulk of my job has been working with the community to find a location and to think about what the zoning would say there. In the case of West Bridgewater, you have a committee, a core group, made up of the planning board chair, who's with us this evening, the zoning board chair, your GIS administrator, your town administrator here today, the assistant town administrator, and your town planner, also here today, all got together and thought, all right, if we're going to comply, and we're not crazy about this idea, but if we're going to comply, how can we go about it that would be the best in the context of West Bridgewater? And so, as you can see up here, and there's also a board in the hall as you entered, if you want to take a closer look after we're done. The committee has selected a preferred site on Route 28, North Main Street, just north of here, north of Town Center. It's 7 parcels, approximately 7.7 acres, and there were a number of reasons that they thought this would be the best location for an MBTA community's zoning overlay. One, its location relatively near the border with Brockton, north of here, which puts it close-ish to the nearest MBTA station. Also, because of its proximity to Brockton, you could see potentially someday in the future there could be interconnects with Brockton utilities that could help support development there. All the parcels but one, so 6 of the 7 parcels, are under the same ownership. And both owners, property owners in this area, have had conversations with the town and are open to a zoning change here. Next, there was traffic considerations. Of course, 106 is notoriously jammed and becoming more so every year. The committee really wanted to avoid making traffic worse there. Things are better along Route 28 generally, so we thought this could accommodate more traffic than other parts of town. And lastly, because it's located here on North Main in a business district and surrounded by either open lands, forested lands, and businesses, it's not abutting any existing residential neighborhoods. It's not going to change the character of any existing residential neighborhoods. So for all those reasons, the committee wanted to explore what things would look like if they established an MBTA community's zoning district there. So next step was looking at what zoning standards would apply. And again, I'm going to ask another annoying question. How many of you feel like you're really familiar with the zoning bylaws in West Bridgewater? Yeah, it's scintillating. I will say they're shorter than a lot of communities. If you get a free evening, you can get through them in a few hours. But one of our goals was to change your existing zoning as little as possible. So what we tried to do was take the existing standards within the business zoning district and apply them to the MBTA community's overlay. Of course, one major change, one major difference is that multifamily has to be allowed by right? That's the crux of the law. And currently, multifamily is not an allowed use in the town, period. There are some instances where you can do 2 families, but 3 or more is not something that is currently allowed in zoning. So obviously that had to change. But all your dimensional standards, so you have a minimum lot area, the same. Your building coverage can only be 30% of the lot can be built on, kept that the same. Your setbacks kept the same. So basically, whatever type of development can be built in the B district, your business district today, a multifamily housing development would have to follow those same standards. Continuing, maximum building height, 40 feet. Your parking, still 2 spaces per unit, plus 1 space for each bedroom over 2. It's your existing policy. At this time, the town is interested in pursuing the maximum cap allowed by the law in terms of affordable units, so that 10% of units at no less than 80% AMI. Another issue, and this might be getting in the weeds a little bit, is residential density. So the town does have the ability to put an absolute cap on the residential density within this zoning district. My argument, my professional opinion, is that all those other things that we've talked about your building height, your lot coverage, your setbacks, your parking, the access to utilities, to water, sewer. All those things combined are what's really going to set the limit on the number of units that can be built. And putting an artificial cap on top of that can sometimes lead to confusion or unintended consequences. But either way, you are certainly, it's certainly within your power to set a residential density cap on top of those things. Another really important point, how many of you are aware that you have a water resource protection district? I've got one. So this is a really important tool for the town. It's where your groundwater collects so that you make sure you have a good amount of clean water. And so the town has standards for development within the Water Resource Protection District to make sure that your groundwater, your drinking water, remains clean and healthy. Now, residential development is a permitted use within that district. That's fine, but it requires a special permit. And as I said at the beginning of this presentation, the law states that multifamily housing has to be allowed by right. So that would be one thing that we have to consider as a town, are ways to apply all the standards of the Water Resources Protection District, but not with a special permit. All right, so I had mentioned the compliance model, this Excel spreadsheet that the state has provided to municipalities to enter in all this data and see if you comply with the law. So basically, the town, our team, pulled all that information in, all that information about setbacks and building height and lot coverage and so forth into this model, and basically you pass with flying colors. You have a relatively low threshold, and you hit all the state's targets. So as I mentioned, there's no minimum required area. This is 7.7 acres. It could be smaller, it could be larger, completely up to you. The modeled unit capacity, again, close your eyes. What does the menu allow in this area? Could be anywhere from 148 to 172 units. Again, it's that 145 that you're hitting, is your target. So you're well within that. And then your dwelling units per acre, about 48 dwelling units per acre. And I know that sounds potentially scary. Of course, if you had a larger area, you could spread that out and it would be a lower density. But I would remind everyone that at the end of the day, all those other things combined that I was talking about, I can't imagine any scenario where you're actually able to hit 48 units per acre. It's going to be much lower than that given the utility capacity that you have today. Also, the draft zoning complies with the limits on affordable housing, like I said, capped at 10%. Does not set any of those limits on numbers of bedrooms, unit size, and so forth. All those policy issues are hit. So basically, this scenario would meet the state requirements, and we hope it also is amenable to the needs of the town. Another concern that we've heard a lot from communities here and elsewhere are design concerns. What is this going to look like? What can this look like? So beyond the uses and dimensional requirements that I just mentioned, the new zoning overlay that the town has been working on can address specific site and building design issues, so long as they are yes or no. These need to be objective. Did you do this, yes or no, as opposed to, I kind of don't like that, I don't know. So the town has come up with, I think, a really decent list of concrete design requirements, including around sidewalks, the amount of open space that you would need, screenings from the street, plantings, to make sure that buildings are oriented to front the street, that you have consistent facade design so that you don't have odd window placement or materials that clash, that you're placing the parking to the rear and the side so you aren't seeing a large surface parking lot at the front of these buildings. Also, promised I'd tell you a little more about site plan review. I'm not even going to bother asking. Yes, we know site plan review is probably not something the average person in West Bridgewater knows much about, but it's a really great thing to have, and it's been a part of your zoning for many years. And in essence, even if a development proposal isn't going through a special permit and, going through all these public hearings and very robust considerations by the whole town, there's still a great deal of review within your site plan review as written. So let's say someone wants to develop something in this zone. They would come to the town, submit their application, would go to the building inspector would inspect it, and then it is reviewed by all of these bodies, and I'll just read them off very quickly. Planning Board, Board of Selectmen, Conservation Commission, Board of Health, Board of Appeals, Historical Commission as relevant, the ADA Compliance Committee, the Fire Department, the Police Department, the Department of Public Works, the Town Planner, and the Tree Warden. So all of these groups would be reviewing any development that came in and making sure that it complies with all your standards. The major difference between site plan review and a special permit is if it's going through site plan review, as I said, you have to have very specific yes or no standards. And if the development meets all those standards, you approve it. Now you can go back and say, I need these conditions to apply because you have not met the targets. You can go back and say, no, you haven't met these targets, you have to try again. But as soon as they can show that they've met all of your standards, it shall be approved. Based on your existing site plan review standards, the town looks at topography, wetlands, parking and loading, soil, signage, traffic flow patterns, erosion, dust and silt control. But wait, there's more. Visual corridors, landscaping and screening, interior circulation, so making sure there are no conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians, emergency access, underground placement of utilities, solar energy, historical considerations, compatibility with neighbors, and maintenance of common areas, just to name a few. So all this is baked into your zoning bylaws and is how the town goes about reviewing development proposals. So almost there, I promise, and then we will open it up to Q&A. So wanted to update the room on the progress that's been made to date. One, as we've already noted, the town has identified a proposed overlay district and has tested in the compliance model, and it does in fact comply with state law. That is a huge piece of this process. Notify and speak with property owners in the proposed overlay district. Again, as I stated, both property owners have been communicated with, and they're both open to this idea. Hold an initial Board of Selectmen information session, which we did last fall. Draft proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw. That draft was finished in December. Hold 2 public information sessions. Of course, we're here January 2025 tonight. We had a second one. Our first was in December. The Bylaw Study Committee, I think, had its first meeting to discuss this yesterday, and will continue to discuss it and make edits. We have the option as a community of submitting a pre-adoption application to the state. Our goal is to do that by February 1st. This is voluntary, but it would give the state an opportunity to say, yes, we agree that this meets the standards prior to you taking this to town meeting. But then essentially the goal is to get this submitted to town meeting for May 2025. If it were to pass, then at that point it would go to the Attorney General's office for approval, just like any other zoning bylaw amendment, and then ultimately be sent to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. Of course, if it goes to town meeting in May and does not pass, you have time. You can take another stab at this in the fall, or you could choose as a community to say, we're done. We did what we could. So that is where things stand. So with that, I'm going to go back to the table. Again, we've got 3 members of the committee that helped work on this draft. We've got microphones up front. If anyone would like to come up and make a comment. I know a lot of people aren't necessarily comfortable speaking in public, so if you have some ideas but you're not really comfortable coming to the mic, please write to Tracy at taltrich@westbridgewater.gov. She'll be taking comments on all of this. So with that, I will stop talking. You've been tremendously patient. Thank you for surviving this lecture on zoning in Massachusetts.
Okay. If anybody wants to come up to the microphone, just turn it on. They're off at the moment.
No? Yeah, okay, good. Mo McCarthy, 23 Captain Carlson Way. I thought might be good for everyone, including me, to get a history of how this whole idea came from the legislature and what was driving it. I still don't understand the rationale for putting this forward in the first place, but perhaps you can enlighten us on that.
No. Again, I'm not with the state. I have nothing to do with the legislature. So to the best of my knowledge, the thought process that was behind the initial law was that the state has invested in transit, that transit gets more use and more users when there is housing within walking distance of it, and that having multifamily housing allowed by right is much easier than going through a special use permit process or a variance process. And so the state wanted to have more people living within walking distance of their transit resources. So I think that's one of the reasons you see affordable housing not really being a priority in this law, because, again, from my understanding, it was more about getting more bodies living within walking distance of transit resources. I'll repeat your question if you say it out loud.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So when we vote at the town, what are we voting for at that time?
So you would be voting for a zoning amendment, a zoning text and map amendment, just like you would for any other type of zoning map or text amendment. So it would follow that same process.
So we would be agreeing that this could be built at that point?
You would be agreeing that you're updating your menu so that that would be an option for property owners at that site.
And just in a nutshell, it would be, you'd be voting to approve a zoning amendment that created a new multifamily housing overlay district and all of the parameters around what would govern in that district.
And the flip side would be if the town, or any of the towns choose not to do this, what is the so-called punishment that would be coming from the state?
Yes, so some of it remains to be seen. What is enumerated in the statute itself are specific grant funding opportunities that the town would not be eligible for. The Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities then came out with a list of 17 additional grant opportunities that the towns would not be, they would be looked on with discretion, so the funder would be able to see, are they in compliance, and if not, that could negatively impact your application or funding. Additionally, the AG's office has said that there could be civil penalties, and in terms of injunctive action, again, it remains to be seen, but potentially having some say in how towns comply. So where the district would be, or you have a district, it didn't pass. We don't know exactly what it could be, but they could make us do something, is the short way of putting it.
So that makes it pretty difficult to answer the question is, should we vote yes or no?
Yeah. It's impossible to say at this point exactly what the Attorney General's office may do.
Button you can hear.
Oh, there it
it
goes.
just-
Oh, it was, and that went out.
A minute, maybe? Oh, yeah, okay. So Linda Cunningham, 4 Pebbles Road. So we approve this zoning, and the developer comes in and buys out all these people's property to build this housing unit. Then they come back to us, and we can still have a say in if the sewer is good enough, if they're not doing all that stuff. Because like in contrast to a 40B, they come in and destroy everything. They don't have to apply to our zoning laws. They have all these things that they can work it out. That's not what we're dealing with here. We have more say in what's going to happen here.
That's correct. So all your zoning continues to apply.
Okay.
So unlike a 40B, they cannot waive your zoning, they cannot bypass your zoning. So like I said, all your standards apply, all your standard site plan review would also apply.
And then if we pick the site, the town goes to the owners of these properties and says, this is what we're looking for. You can either sell to these people or not. And what if they don't?
So the law does not require anything be built. So what the law does is require zoning be put in place to allow for multifamily housing. It could sit the same for 20 years.
Okay.
It could change the day after the zoning gets approved.
Okay.
It's totally within the purview of the owners of those
Of
properties.
the property. And
Yep.
so then they decide they're not going to do that. So then are we out of compliance because we now don't have a zoning area?
No, we would
No.
be in compliance because we zoned for it.
Okay, great. So
Yep.
then what would be the downside to not just get on board with that?
To not
Yeah,
approving the.
yeah, like why wouldn't we just do this if it's going to come back and we do have some control? Is there a downside to not, I mean, it sounds like we have to do it. And what is the bad side of doing it if we can still control how it gets built?
Yep, so I guess I would say generally, if people are not morally opposed to the proposal of where this district is located, and they're comfortable with the current zoning, and we would be kind of controlling our own destiny in that
Right.
regard, there wouldn't be a downside, other than we would then have multifamily housing. People that are opposed to it morally may, on those grounds, may decide that they don't want to approve it. I think what will happen if we don't comply, it remains to be seen.
Okay. So then when will this happen? Our deadline is December 25th, and then we have to decide next year to vote on it as a town?
So as an adjacent small town, our deadline for compliance is December 31st of 2025.
So we have to vote.
it will come before town meeting.
Okay.
If we go through the bylaw study process, the planning board, all of the processes that we go through for
Mm-hmm.
the zoning amendments, if it gets through that process, the intention is to get it before town meeting this May.
Okay.
So then we could figure out from there where we go.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The definition of multifamily again is like an apartment complex? Is that multifamily or not?
Per the legislation, the definition of multifamily is any building of 3 or more units or a site that has two or more buildings with 2 or more units. But basically, it could be a 3-family house would count as multifamily.
Did I read incorrectly that there's no limit to the number of people that could be in any unit, or do our zoning laws control?
Beyond building code. So building code sets, limits on the number of people, but you can't make it less than the building code, essentially.
Again, how many units in total proposed?
Again, the unit capacity is 145, which is different than saying we're going to build 145 units. It's just the zoning has to theoretically allow that.
I'm trying to calculate in my mind the potential increase to our school system. That's pretty easy to
sorry, I'll make sure we repeat the questions.
How many, what is a unit? You said you were gonna really explain that, and I don't think you really did. But a 7.7 acre lot of 7 zones, or parcels that you call them, how many apartments are we gonna see on that? What's this thing gonna look like?
So again, that's where, but this is a sticking point for a lot of people, and I'll say it again, that this zoning is a menu and not a development proposal. So only a development proposal that's saying, I'm coming in, I'm going to comply with zoning. It could end up being any number of different things, but no more than 145 units. And again, because of the capacity of your utilities today, because of water and sewer access, like there is no way without significant investment or a connection to Brockton that you would be able to get 145 units. So I cannot give you that answer, but no more than 145 and more than likely significantly less.
So, let's say, you know, we go through all this motion, right, and the town decides to not do it, right, we vote on it, it looks good. Can the state come in and take it by eminent domain? Enforce something with the big bill, or the unfortunate?
The question was, can the state take things by eminent domain if a developer is not doing anything with the property? And I would say, according to this law, no, there's nothing in this law that would give the state the authority to do that.
Is this on? No? Yes? Good. It would appear that whether it's an addition of 1 unit or addition of 145, it does not come without a cost to the town. We have a great fire and police department. That would have to be expanded. There's a whole lot of, it doesn't appear that this takes into consideration the potential cost to the town. And I noticed when you had site review, one of the things that didn't appear to be up there was the school department, which we were just presented with a wonderful opportunity for a new elementary school that will fit this. But then you put 145, and I go, that's the maximum. But if you put 60, if you put 50, now you start to stress what you've already done. And does that go into whether or not it's accepted, a developer comes in? Is that considered as part of an approval process?
As far as site plan review goes, we do not look at the schools. We look at the infrastructure. We look at the driveways. Are they adequate? Lighting. Is it going to be any light pollution shining the whole neighborhood over? That's the kind of stuff that comes on. Make sure they have the right utilities. Make sure that the drainage is right, is where it comes in. I don't think by law we can do something because our schools can't handle it or use that as a zoning criteria. One of the things we do in this town use as a zoning criteria is our wetlands and our lack of permeable areas for septic system. But that's all within the law. Okay. But for us to say we won't have, well, if it's 145 units, if each one just has one, never mind the 1.5, whatever the average is, that's I don't know how many classrooms that is, but that's a lot of.
It does stress what we have.
Is. But I don't believe, I may stand corrected, but I don't believe that we can use the schools for a reason not to. And it's some case law on it, but I'm not familiar. I've seen some, but I can't remember.
The schools is just an example. I mean, all the other public utilities that we have become stressed because now you need more people, and it goes from 75 units, and you need the people to service those.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
If we were to add the maximum amount of units, would that put us in compliance with the 40B?
Al, can you do me a favor? I received a text from cable. They can't pick you up on TV, so could you do it at the microphone, please? And I'll just ask for everybody else as well.
if we add the maximum amount of units that they're talking, will that put us in compliance for 40B?
The short answer is no.
A slightly longer answer is, even if you can't require more than 10% affordable housing, that would not stop the town from trying to pursue a friendly 40B. And a friendly 40B could make a big dent towards your 10%. So it doesn't preclude that, you just can't require it. Do people know what a friendly 40B is? Okay.
All right, are there any other questions? And again, I'm on the second floor in Town Hall. Open door policy. If there's any questions, you think of anything afterwards, come on in. I'm happy to speak with you. My email address is on the town's website, as well as the materials that are related to this with a little more in-depth at the guidelines that are not enforceable, but they're going to look a lot like the regulations that were just filed or up there. So it'll answer some of the minutia if you have questions. But thank you all for coming.